Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard. Tonight we're learning Parshat Ki Tavo, and we're learning the first two Torahs in Fruits of the Orchard. The first one is called a covenant of marriage, and the second one is called a land of faith. So I'm going to just read the first opening verse of the Parsha in Hebrew and English. So it says, V'haya ki tavo el haaretz, and it will be when you come into the land. And remember, this is Moshe Rabbeinu in the last 37 days of his life, getting closer to the end. And Israel's getting ready to come into the land. Moshe, of course, is not going to lead them in, but this parsha is preparing them. V'haya ki tavo la'aretz, when you come into the land, Asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha, that God, your God, is giving you. Nachala v'yirishta v'yashavta ba. It is He's giving it to you as an inheritance, as your portion, an inheritance and you will dwell in it. That's the opening verse. Then it goes on and explains the mitzvah of the first fruits. And then it continues with the idea of Meiser and Truma that have to be given on all of the fruits of the land. And then it continues with this special ritual that happened when we came into the land, where we went to these two mountains, Mount Eval and Mount Gerizim, and we pronounced what was called the blessing and the curse. And it was a renewal of the covenant because it had just come into the land, and it was renewing the covenant between Israel and God. So let's go back now to the first verse. When you come into the land that Hashem, your God, is giving you as an inheritance, and you will dwell in it. So the first thing we'll comment is last week's parsha was Ki Tavo leMilchama, when you go out to war. And this parsha is when you come in to the land. So many of the commentaries notice the juxtaposition. First it's going out, and then it's coming in. And this is very much like the dynamic that we have learned many times in different contexts called ratzo v'shov, going out, running out, and returning, coming back. The tetzei lemilchama, v'haya ki tavo el haaretz. So that's just a very interesting idea, is this idea of going out and coming in. And in our day, there's a certain wisdom of knowing when to go out and when to come in, when to run and when to return, when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to rest. So all of these go together with the juxtaposition of going out and coming in. Now, one of the things that the Talmud mentions is when a parsha begins, or a whole passage begins with the word v'haya. Now, if it didn't have a vav in front of it, haya means in the past, when you came into the land. But we know that when you put a vav in front of a verb in the Torah, it switches it to the future. So v'haya is when you will come into the land. So the sages point out that when a parsha begins with the word v'haya, it's called lashon simcha. It's a language of joy. And I don't have it in front of me, but the Talmud brings many examples of passages in the Tanakh that begin with v'haya, and it's a language of joy. So this immediately alerts us to the idea of coming into Israel is full of joy. And for those who have been following Living with the Times, going back a few weeks, we mentioned that we always read this parsha in Chodesh Elul, leading up to Rosh Hashanah, and it's part of the tshuva process. And we pointed out that the parshas before this, they're all, we'll call it serious messages of the importance of doing tshuva and how to do tshuva. And then we come to this parsha, V'haya Ki Tavo el Artz, and it'll be when you come into the land, and it's the language of joy. And so it's telling us that as we're preparing for Rosh Hashanah, as we're doing what's called Cheshbon HaNefesh, an accounting of the soul, and doing tshuva and serious introspection, we should never lose track of doing it in the context of joy. As we've mentioned, Rosh Hashanah is a serious, awesome day. It's called the Days of Awe, Yamim HaNoraim. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be with great, great joy. So this parsha coming before Rosh Hashanah, actually the second day of Rosh Hashanah is 3 weeks from today. So we're reminded to be in a state of joy, even when we're doing tshuva and heartfelt introspection. Now, why is this insight in Fruits of the Orchard called the covenant of marriage? Is because the word, the root, bo, is the root of one of the words that indicates a marital intimate relations, bia. Bia comes from the word to come. And I'll just mention, even in English, there is this term of in sexual relations of coming. So here we see the root is in the Torah that one of the expressions for intimate relations is bia. And so here, this idea of coming into the land means it's part of an intimate relationship that we have with God. And we'll call it the vehicle for this intimate relationship is coming into the land. That is an indication of the covenant of marriage. So here we see that on Shabbat, we have a very similar thing. And I'll just mention, if anyone has it in their bookshelf right there, on page 307 of 70 Faces, there's a little section that explains that in the prayer of Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, lasod et Shabbat l'dorotam b'rit olam, beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam, ki shesh yamim asa Hashem et hashemayim v'et haaretz, u'b'yom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash. This is the Vishamru b'nei Yisrael, and Israel will guard the Shabbat. And we sing this right before the Amidah on Friday night, right before the silent prayer, the standing prayer on Friday night. And it's also part of Kiddush during the day. So if you look in the words, the word bia is mentioned twice in acronyms. The first time is when it says, Beini ubein b'nei Yisrael, ot hi leolam, between me and the children of Israel, it is an everlasting sign. So bia is spelled out, b'nei Yisrael, ot hi. That's the bet, yud, aleph, hey. So it spells out bia. In other words, Shabbat, and we know from the Talmud that we're told that the most auspicious time for marital relations is on Shabbat. And then there's a second acronym, and this is right from the beginning, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, and the children of Israel shall keep the Shabbat. So the word Bia is spelled out again in an acronym, B'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, Bet Yud Aleph Hey. So this is twice in V'shamru, this idea of intimate relation with God. But here it's also, in our parsha, it's intimate relations with the land of Israel. Again, we're talking metaphorically. And also our intimate connection with Shabbat. And this is something we've mentioned a number of times, that in relation to God, B'nai Yisrael is the Kala, is the bride. And God, as it were, is the Chatan, the groom. And this is throughout the Tanakh, especially in the Song of Songs, and in many of the different metaphors and parables of the prophets. It's on page 307 in 70 Faces, what we've been saying. The prophets many times use the metaphor of Israel being the Kala, the bride, and God being the groom. And our relationship is one of a covenant of marriage. But in relationship to the land of Israel, so the roles reverse. Am Yisrael is the groom, and the land is the bride. And we always refer to the land. The word for Eretz is a feminine word. The word for earth, Adamah, is a feminine word. And the expression Mother Earth is something very rooted in Torah, in Judaism. This idea of the feminine aspect of the land in our relationship. And the same thing with Shabbat, where we are the groom and Shabbat is our bride. And that's expressed in the most popular song for Shabbat, Lecha Dodi. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat nikabela. Lecha Dodi, come my beloved. We're speaking to God. Come my beloved, let us go and greet the bride. So Shabbat is our bride, and it's also God's bride. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, Pnei Shabbat, the face of Shabbat, Nikabala, we should receive. So this is the most joyous song that we sing on Shabbat evening. And this is confirming this idea of Shabbat being our bride. Now there's another hint in the Parsha. So where it says, V'yeshavta ba, and you shall dwell in it. So the word for in it is ba, which is feminine. And it says v'yeshavta ba. Yeshavta means you shall settle it, you shall dwell in it, you shall live in it. But the root is Shabbat, to sit, shev, to inherit the land and dwell in it. But here again, the land is called by the feminine. Now what's interesting is on Shabbat, so in the Amida of the night, the day, and at Mincha time, so we say, Vayanuchu, Israel rested in it. So at night we say, Vayanuchu ba, we rest in her. In the day, we say vayinuchu bo. We rest in it, but in the masculine. And at mincha time, we say vayinuchu bam, which is the plural of male and female together. So here, again, the Shabbat is referred to as ba, in her, and the land is also that we should dwell in her. So all of this indicates everything that we're saying, this deep love relationship between Israel and God, between Israel and the land. And in this parsha, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a description of this ritual that happened really one time when we came into the land, where we went to these two mountains, and it was like a confirmation of the relationship between God and Israel. And it happened right as we came into the land, to also make a covenant on the land. And though there are different opinions, but one of the opinions is that when God made a covenant with Avram, the first covenant he made, even before circumcision, was what was called Brit Ben Betarim, the covenant of the pieces, where God promised Avram the land of Israel for eternity. And that was the first covenant that God made with Avram, and obviously with the Jewish people, was on the land. And so there is an opinion that the very place where God made the covenant on the land with Avram is between these two mountains, where Israel came and 6 tribes went up to one mountain and 6 went up to the other mountain, and the Kohanim and the Levim were in the middle, and they pronounced what's called the blessing and the curse. The rest of the parsha of Ki Tavo is about a blessing and a curse, as is almost the whole book of Devarim. The whole book of Devarim repeats in different ways this concept of blessing and curse. So we'll finish this first insight, this idea of a covenant of marriage between God and Israel. And it's alluded to, as we've mentioned here in the first verse, of Israel coming into the land. V'haya ki tavo el haaretz, when you come into the land. The second insight is the next one in Fruits of the Orchard, and it's called a land of faith. And as I said before, almost everything in this parsha has to do with the land. First, we come into the land, and then we bring the bikurim, the first fruits of the land, and then about the tithing of the produce of the land, and then this ritual of the covenant with Eretz Yisrael. And then there's this blessing and curse. But if you look at the blessing, it's all about the blessings you'll get when you live in Eretz Yisrael. And the curse is, if you don't behave properly and follow the Torah and listen to God, what will follow is terrible exile from the land. So the whole parsha is really about the land. So in this parsha, the following phrase is repeated 3 times, that it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Eretz zavat chalav udavash, a land flowing with milk and honey, 3 times in this parsha. Now, this is not the only time that Eretz Yisrael is referred to in this way, but the fact that it's 3 times in one parsha is, again, what's called a chazaka. It strengthens this idea of the beauty of the land, the blessing of the land flowing with milk and honey. So one of the most important places where this phrase occurs in a different parsha is in Parshat Ve'et Hanan, which is, 3 weeks ago approximately. And interestingly enough, it comes right before the Shema. The Shema in the division of the parshas is the 6th aliyah, the 6th section of the parsha of Ve'et Hanan. But the 5th one ends with saying, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udavash. And then the next verse is, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So this confirms an idea that it says in the Talmud, and this is not literal, but in a sense, there is something literal about it, where they say that anyone living in Israel, it's like they have a God. And outside of Israel, it's as if we're more distant from God. That the closeness that we can achieve with the Holy One, blessed be He, in Israel is qualitatively different than what we can feel and experience and achieve outside of Israel. And so this idea, right before the Shema, which is confirming the oneness of God, it's juxtaposed to the idea that Israel is a land flowing with milk and honey. So there's a deep hint to this. I learned this from Rav Ginsburg. If you take the expression Eretz, take out the word zavat, which means flowing, but Eretz Chalav Davash, the first letters, Eretz is an aleph, Chalav is a chet, and Davash is a daled, and that spells out echad. So this is a hint to the oneness of God is felt much stronger on a much more intimate level in the land of Israel. That's where the oneness of God is most experienced. So having said this, I want to repeat something from the Tuesday class, our fundamentals class. Many of you might have been there and many not, but I'm going to repeat it. And for some, it might be new, but it's just a very deep understanding of the word echad, God's oneness. And we know that this is really the mission of the Jewish people from the time of Avram till Mashiach and beyond, is teaching the world the oneness of God, and by extension, the oneness of all of creation. And so Rav Ginsburg explains that in an acronym, if you take the word echad, and each letter represents a word, it explains the creative process, in a sense, how God went about creating the world. So the aleph of echad is ahava, love. The chet of echad is chachma, wisdom. And the daled of echad is dibur, speech. So let's go back. So ahava, chachma, dibur. Love, wisdom, speech. So when we contemplate why did God create the world, why did God have a need or wanted a physical material world that is seemingly separate from God? We know that all there is God, but it appears that there is a separation. And that's because of God's love. God wanted to give, to share, to do deeds of loving kindness, and there had to be a recipient. So the original, we'll call it thought of creation, is God wanted to give. Now that God wants to give, well, how does the creative process come about? So that's through wisdom, chachma. And we say it every day. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem. How great are your deeds, Hashem? Kulam b'chachma asita. You made them all in wisdom. So God takes his love and it's translated into God's wisdom about how to create the world. And so then the last step is, well, how does God create the world? Now we have God's wisdom that is going to infuse every particle, every atom, every living thing, every galaxy, everything. But how does it come about? And that's what we're told that we say every morning, Baruch she'amar v'hayolam. Blessed is the one who spoke and the world came into being. And we have this tradition that it says in the Torah, it actually says 9 times, and God said, let there be, and then whatever God said, let there be, came into being through speech. So here, the oneness of God, this is like a formula of the creative process. Love, wisdom, speech. Ahava, chachma, dibur. Now, we can translate this into our own lives, especially in this season, because what we're really trying to do through the whole tshuva process, preparing for a new year, improving ourselves, setting goals, New Year's resolutions, is to create a new us, a new energy, a new perspective, new horizons. And so we can take the same formula that first we have to love God, we have to love life, we have to love other people, and we have to love ourselves. And once we can do that, then we can translate it into kulam b'chachma sita. You made everything in wisdom. Then we could start, well, how can I be a better person? How can I improve myself? What can I add to my life that will bring more joy, that will bring me closer to God, will bring me closer to fulfilling my potential? That's through chachma. And then dibur is speech, is putting it into action. Not in the mitzvot, so many of the mitzvot are done through speech, but speech is considered an action. So we get aroused through love. We translate that into wise plans, practical plans of improvement. And then we put it into action. So all of this is the idea of the word echad. And this is connected to Eretz, Chalav, Davash, a land of milk and honey. So continuing about Eretz Yisrael. So one of the ways that we refer to Eretz Yisrael is Eretz Tzvi, the land of the deer. So we ask, well, what's the connection? I mean, a deer is a beautiful animal, but why are we calling Eretz Yisrael Eretz Tzvi? So first of all, the word Tzvi, Tzadi Bet Yud, equals 102, equals Emunah, faith. And that's why this article in Fruits of the Orchard is called a land of faith. It's called Eretz Tzvi because it's a land of faith. The Jewish people for 2,000 years never gave up their, not just hope, but their belief, their faith that we would return one day. For many generations, it probably seemed like an impossible dream. What Am Yisrael went through in the exile, for so many people, it probably seemed very far away. Nonetheless, every day in the Amidah, in our prayers, every day when we would say the Birchan Hamazon, the grace after meals, we would mention about coming back to Jerusalem, coming back to Israel. We had that faith. So it's called Eretz Tzvi because it's a land of faith. Another beautiful connection is in the mystical alphabet called Atbash. Atbash is, At is Aleph and Tav. Bash is Bet and Shin. So in this type of mystical alphabet, we replace the first letter with the last letter, and the second letter with the second last letter. So in Atbash, the name Moshe is Tzvi. The Mem becomes a Tzadi, the Shin becomes a Bet, and the Hey, I'll do it differently. The Hey becomes the Tzadi, the Shin becomes the Bet, and the Mem becomes the Yud. So Moshe's name is in Atbash is Tzvi, is deer. And the expression in the Zohar, in the Zoharic literature, there are whole sections that are called Raya Mehemna, the faithful servant. Who is his faithful servant? Moshe. Moshe is called the faithful servant. And even though he did not come into Eretz Yisrael, he never gave up the faith that Israel would come in. He shepherded Israel for 40 years through incredible challenges, obstacles. We should never know such big obstacles. For 40 years, he led Israel to the borders of the land. And he himself did not come into the land, but he planted in the Jewish people this faith to never, ever give up coming into the land. So when Moshe sent the spies, 12 spies, and that's how we ended up wandering for 40 years in the desert, is 10 of them came back with a, we'll call it evil report, and told the people it is a land flowing with milk and honey, but the people are too strong. There are giants there, there's fortified cities, we'll never be able to conquer them. And because of that, for every day that they spied out the land, we ended up, measure for measure, spending a year in the desert. Those were the 40 years. But 2 of the spies not only gave a good report, but said, don't listen to them. We can make it into the land. And Caliph said, Tova ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. The land is very, very good. Tova ha'oretz ma'od ma'od. So again, an insight from Rav Ginsburg, that if you take those 4 words and you add them up, it equals 408. There are 4 words. So there is a method where if you want to see in a phrase or a verse, what is the average of each of the words in the verse? In other words, what's the common denominator? So if you take 408, and you divide by 4, the 4 words, it comes out to 102. Well, 102 equals emunah, equals faith. So when they were saying Tova ha'aretz ma'od ma'od, first of all, they were expressing their faith that of course we could come into the land. God promises the land. Of course we could come in. So Kalev and Yeshua, because of their faith, they were allowed to come into the land. They could come into the land. So one more reason that the land is called Eretz Tzvi. So the Talmud points out that what's special about the deer is, and if anyone's seen a deer from up close, their skin is incredibly taut. It's not like you have like any extra fat there. The skin is stretched very, very tight. And it says that if you would kill a deer and skin it, if you would want to try to put it back on the animal, there would be no way that you could, because it is so taut, you could not get it back on the animal. And that's, the sages use that as a metaphor that the land of Israel is holding so much. And the expression is hama'at hamachzik et merubah, the little that holds a lot. So this skin, it's so tight, it's like holding so much in it. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, along with just one of the reasons that the land is called Eretz Tzvi, a land of faith, is that the letter for this month of Elul is the letter Yud. And this expression, the little that holds a lot, is said by the sages primarily to explain the nature and the dynamic of the letter Yud. The Yud is the smallest of the letters. And it represents actually tzimtzum, contraction. It's the first of God's 4-letter name. And it represents tzimtzum, that God's infinite being contracted in order to make space for the world. And this is represented by the Yud. And so we can glean a very beautiful personal message here, is that each and every one of us is brimming with potential. Each one of us is like a Yud, is the little that holds so much. And the whole avoda of this month is recognizing our potential, coming to terms with our potential, and trying to figure out how to activate and fulfill our mission, our potential in this world. So here I want to end with a blessing that, first of all, bless everyone to be able to come to Eretz Yisrael and to feel the joy. V'haya ki tavo el haaretz. That v'haya is lashon simcha. Coming to Eretz Yisrael is a joyous experience. So I bless everyone to be able to come. And of course, eventually, Bezrat Hashem, every Jew will come home. And also that, like the Tzvi, we're told that when Mashiach comes, the holiness of Eretz Yisrael will spread to the entire world. So the land of Israel is the little that holds a lot. May we all keep that in mind and be blessed with the blessings of Eretz Israel.